Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sumner family. James and Carol Alford, also known as Reggie and Sunar, grew up together in Charleston, South Carolina. They were the same age, attended the same school, and were in the same grade. As they grew older, their childhood friendship blossomed into romance. By the time they were 15, they had started dating and were inseparable. Their friends thought they made a beautiful couple, and James and Carol kept photos of their happy early years in their archives. They dreamed of a long, happy life together and planned to get married as soon as they turned 18. Their parents approved of their relationship and supported their decision. However, their plans were put on hold when James was called up for military service in the Army. They decided to postpone their wedding until his return and exchanged regular letters. But as time passed, James was sent to Vietnam, and contact with him was lost. Carol didn't know if he was alive, as he stopped writing to her. Carol continued her studies and got a job at the Charleston Air Force Base. She married twice, first in the late 1960s, but that marriage ended quickly and she had no children. In 1975, she married Richard Alford, with whom she had a daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. But her second marriage was also troubled, as her husband abused her and their daughter. In the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer tolerate the abuse and filed for divorce, taking her daughter with her. But Richard continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, he attacked her, shooting her several times in front of their 10-year-old daughter. Carol was lucky to survive, thanks to her neighbors who called for help. She underwent multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, and eventually recovered, although she lost sight in one eye and was left disabled. Her health began to deteriorate again in the late 1990s, and after a series of tests, she was diagnosed with liver cancer. In 1987, Carol's life was in danger due to medical complications, and she unknowingly contracted the hepatitis C virus. Over time, the virus damaged her liver, leading to cancer. Fortunately, with proper treatment and therapy, her condition stabilized. However, she had to take daily medications and undergo regular checkups for the rest of her life. The hepatitis C diagnosis, combined with previous severe gunshot wounds, made it impossible for her to work physically demanding jobs. She eventually found work as a call center operator. Meanwhile, James, her high school sweetheart, had a traumatic experience in Vietnam. He was severely wounded and mistakenly reported dead. He survived and returned home, but lost contact with Carol. Years later, James married, but the marriage ended and he was left alone, struggling with chronic health issues. In 2000, Carol received a call at work from a familiar voice, James. She was hesitant to believe it was really him, as she thought he had died in the war. The two cried and reminisced, eventually agreeing to meet in person. After 38 years apart, they reunited and rekindled their romance. Carol and James started seeing each other daily and soon decided to move in together. They got married 5 months later and lived in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina. Despite their health issues, they were happy and took care of each other. They lived near the Cole family, who had their own set of troubles, including Stephen, a Vietnam veteran confined to a wheelchair, and his wife Natalie, who often spent time with friends in bars. Tiffany, the daughter of James's ex, was often left to fend for herself from a young age. She would hang out on the streets with no money, not even for small treats. When James and Carol started living together, Tiffany was still in high school. Carol, being kind-hearted, sympathized with the girl who was unwanted by her own mother. For 5 years, Carol looked out for Tiffany like a daughter, inviting her to family meals, buying her clothes, and giving her money for expenses. In 2004, when the Summers decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumino minivan, Tiffany asked to buy it in installments since she had no money and desperately needed a car. The Summers agreed to sell it to her for a very low price, divided into 12 payments over a year. In early 2005, the Summers were forced to move to Florida due to their deteriorating health. Doctors recommended a warmer climate, so they sold their Charleston home and bought a new one in Jacksonville, along with a Lincoln Town car. They were happy in their new home, making plans for their future. Every day, Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda, sharing her thoughts and plans. But one day in June 2005, Carol didn't call, and Rhonda couldn't reach her. Rhonda was worried but hoped everything was okay. The next day, there was still no answer. Rhonda called her mother's and James's cell phones every half hour, but they were unavailable and the answering machine remained unanswered. On the third day, Rhonda drove to Florida to check on her mother and stepfather. When she arrived, she noticed the car was missing, the front door was open, and the house was in disarray. There was a table set for dinner, but the food was 3 days old. It looked like the owners had abruptly left in the middle of a meal. Rhonda saw medications, including her mother's cancer pills and James's insulin, on the bedside table. The cell phones were dead. Rhonda realized her mother and stepfather couldn't have left without their medications and phones, so she contacted the police to report the incident. The police put out a wanted list for the Summers car, blocked their bank cards, and began searching for them. The first few days yielded no results, but on June 12th, a man called a bank, claiming to be James Schur, complaining that his card was blocked. This led the police to investigate further. The bank employee became suspicious when checking the card information and offered Mr. Schur to visit the nearest branch to resolve the issue, but he hung up. Shortly after, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carol Schur, and reported a similar problem with her blocked card. When asked to visit the bank in person, she refused, citing health issues, and asked to regain access to her savings, which was denied. The bank immediately handed over the call recordings and information to the police. When played to Rhonda, the couple's daughter, she confirmed that the voices did not belong to her parents, who were in their 60s, while the callers sounded much younger. The police suspected that the imposters were involved in the couple's disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after obtaining bank account information. A few days later, the couple's abandoned car was found on a deserted road with no signs of struggle or blood inside. However, hair and sweat marks from both spouses were found in the trunk, suggesting they were taken away in their own car. Further investigation revealed that money had been withdrawn from their accounts after their disappearance, and ATM footage showed a young man making the withdrawals. The police traced the calls made from the imposter's number and found that the SIM card was purchased shortly before the couple's disappearance. A call was made to a car rental company where a Mazda RX-8 was rented under the name Tiffany Cole. The same car was used to withdraw money from the couple's accounts. Using the car's built-in tracking device, the police located the Mazda RX-8 at a hotel in Charleston. A team was sent to apprehend the suspects, who were found celebrating in their hotel room, surrounded by packages and receipts from lavish purchases. The three suspects, Tiffany Cole, Michael J. Jackson, and Alan Lindell Wade, were taken into custody and questioned separately. Initially, they feigned ignorance or remained silent, but after several hours of interrogation and presentation of evidence, Tiffany confessed to robbing the elderly couple and using their stolen money to fund their lifestyle. Tiffany and her new boyfriend stayed overnight at the Summers house, where they were treated to dinner and hospitality. During the meal, Carol Summers mentioned that they had almost $100,000 in savings, which sparked an idea in Tiffany's mind. That night, Tiffany and her boyfriend began making plans to get their hands on the money. They enlisted the help of two accomplices, Bruce and Alan, and started putting their plan into action. On June 6th, Tiffany rented a car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to a deserted spot in the woods and began digging a grave for the Summers. On July 8th, Tiffany bought rope and duct tape, which she gave to Bruce and Alan. That evening, they approached the Summers house, pretending to need help and asking to use their phone. Carol, feeling sorry for them, let them in. Once inside, Bruce and Alan attacked the Summers, binding their hands and feet with duct tape and blindfolding them. They questioned the couple about their money and valuables, threatening them with torture and death. The Summers gave in, hoping to spare their lives. As soon as the attackers got the information they needed, 2 more accomplices arrived, helping to drag the Summers out to their car. They drove the car to the woods, with Tiffany and her boyfriend following behind in a second car. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm and remove the duct tape from his and his wife's faces. But it was too late. The car stopped, and the Summers were led to the grave, where they were pushed to their deaths. The elderly couple pleaded for their lives, but the young criminals showed no mercy, brutally killing them by burying them alive. According to Bruce, the perpetrators covered the bound couple with earth for about an hour, during which time the victims cried, confessed their love for each other, and said goodbye. The autopsy later revealed that the couple died of suffocation, with pieces of soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs. After committing the heinous crime, the criminals abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They broke into the Summer house, stealing valuable items, and then returned to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their celebration was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all 4 perpetrators were arrested 4 days later. The trial and conviction followed. Bruce Nixon, who had fully admitted his guilt and cooperated with the investigation, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Tiffany Cole, who claimed she was not directly involved in the murder, was given the death penalty, along with Jackson and Lindell, who had chosen to remain silent. The evidence against them, including Tiffany's involvement in the criminal plan, renting a car, and participating in the grave digging, was overwhelming. The 4 criminals appealed their sentences multiple times, but they were all denied. Although Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell were sentenced to death, the penalty was never carried out, even 18 years after their atrocious crime. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Teresa Halbach. Teresa was born on March 22, 1980, to parents Richard and Karen Halbach. She was the youngest of 5 siblings, and the family she lived on a dairy farm. When Teresa was 8 years old, tragedy struck as her father passed away, leaving Karen to care for the family alone. Karen later married her Richard's brother, Thomas, and together they raised their blended family. Teresa is an adventurous and nature-loving individual who dreamed of becoming a National Geographic photojournalist. She excelled academically, graduating summa cum laude from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay with a degree in photography. After college, Teresa continued her work with Pierce Photography, a company where she had interned during her studies. She also launched her own business, Photography by Teresa, operating from the Pierce studio. Teresa traveled extensively for her work and to supplement her income. She took on freelance photography jobs for Auto Trader magazine, photographing vehicles for sale. Tragically, this job ultimately resulted in her premature death. All evidence pointed to a single suspect, Stephen Avery. He had contacted Teresa to schedule a photo shoot of his sister's minivan. According to records, Teresa was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. This was later confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby, who told the police that he saw Teresa's car enter the salvage yard. Stephen was originally charged with using a gun on November 11, 2005. Subsequent charges included the murder of Teresa Halbach, her kidnapping, and the mutilation of her body. However, while being investigated for these crimes, the police found blood in the SUV Teresa's that matched Stephen's. In his room, they discovered a set of car keys belonging to Teresa. Throughout the investigation, he insisted that the police were attempting to frame him. Stephen was born on July 9, 1962, in Wisconsin, where he grew up with his parents Dolores and Alan, and siblings Charles, Earl, and Barbara. However, he had a troubled past, having dropped out of high school with a reported IQ of 70. In 1981, he was jailed for 10 months after breaking into a bar. In the following year, he was found guilty of animal cruelty for brutally killing his pet cat. The cat was doused with gasoline and set on fire, resulting in a 9-month prison sentence. Stephen had a record of behaving violently in the past, including an incident where he threatened his cousin, Sharon Morris. He chased her off the street and pointed a gun at her, claiming that she was spreading false rumors about him. Although Stephen received a 6-year sentence for this crime, but then he was given bail. However, an incident led to his wrongful imprisonment for nearly 2 decades. Henny Bernstein was attacked on a beach in Two Rivers on July 29, 1985. She described her attacker to the police, and the description closely matched Stephen. As a result, he was arrested and charged with the attack on Penny. Despite his claims of innocence, his appeals in 1987 and 1996 were denied by higher courts. Stephen's case was later taken on by the Wisconsin Innocence Project in 2001. In 2002, DNA evidence was re-examined, and he was finally exonerated of the crimes, proving his innocence. Following his exoneration, he filed a civil lawsuit against Thomas Kokarek, the former sheriff, and Dennis Vogel, the former district attorney, seeking $36 million in damages for the wrongful conviction. However, Stephen's freedom does not last long because his life is about to undergo a major change. When Teresa, a friend of Stephen's, went missing, a search was conducted at a local salvage yard. This search was initiated based on information given by Bobby, Stephen's nephew. Stephen reported that Teresa came to his location to take photos and then left. However, evidence found at the scene contradicts Stephen's testimony. These included bone fragments, a set of SUV car keys, blood in a vehicle, and a bullet from the garage with Teresa's DNA on it. As a result, Stephen was jailed for Teresa's murder. During this time, he received a sum of $400,000 in a settlement in February 2006. The investigation also involved questioning Stephen's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. It is worth noting that Brendan was not accompanied by his parents or lawyer during the interrogation process. Initially, Brendan confessed to the crime, stating that he and Brendan had assaulted and killed Teresa before burning her body. However, Brendan later withdrew his statement, claiming that detectives had coerced him into making a false confession. In 2006, Brendan was charged as an accessory to the murder, a charge that stemmed from his initial statement. Despite the lack of physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, but he faced the same charges as Stephen. In 2007, Stephen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that year, Brendan was also found guilty of a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2048. A conviction was made, but it was met with controversy. Many people, including Stephen's family and his ex-fiancée Sandy Greenman, still firmly believe that Stephen and Brendan are innocent. Stephen's family continues to support him and hope that the real killer will be found. Sandy has been a vocal advocate for Stephen. She described Stephen as a model inmate and argues that people wrongly tarnish his reputation. Sandy spoke out in Brendan's defense, denying allegations that he had a history of violence. In contrast, some people firmly believe that Stephen is guilty and should be in prison. One of these individuals is Jody Stokowski, another ex-fiancée of Stephen's. Jody initially supported Stephen's claim of innocence, but she later admitted that had made it up. In an interview, Jody revealed that Stephen had threatened to harm her and her family. Therefore, she believes that he is capable of murder. Jody said that Stephen wanted revenge on women, believing that he had been treated unfairly and that his life had been affected because of it. She strongly believes that Stephen is untrustworthy and described him as a monster. Stephen's defense team questioned the reliability of the blood evidence found in Teresa's car. They argued that the evidence may not have come from the crime scene, but from another source, taken from the vial containing Stephen's blood from a prior conviction. They claimed that the vial containing Stephen's blood had been tampered with and a hole could be seen in the cork. However, the prosecution countered this by conducting blood tests to check for preservatives that are often added to stored blood samples. Since no preservatives were detected, this could indicate that the blood was not old but newly drawn. Tive, which could suggest that the blood was fresh. Stephen's defense team disputed this finding, they calling in an expert witness, who claimed that the test results were unclear, and negative result could mean that there really is no preservative or that the testing technology is not advanced enough to detect preservatives. Both Stephen and Brendan have repeatedly appealed their convictions, but have been denied and they remain incarcerated. Brendan is currently be justified Professors Laura Nyroder and Brendan Drizin from Northwestern University. They have also faced many hurdles, but they remain committed to seeking justice for Brendan. In Stephen's case, the appointment of Kathleen Zellner, a renowned trial lawyer, has injected new hope. Kathleen has a track record of overturning 19 wrongful convictions and is known for her thorough analysis of cases and her ability to uncover missing evidence. She quickly got to work on Stephen's case, and she firmly believes in his innocence. Stephen's previous lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, have stepped back from the case. In August 2016, Kathleen requested that new scientific tests be conducted on evidence from the case, and she was willing to cover the costs. Her goal was to prove that Stephen was framed for the crime. She focused on 3 burn pits found at the scene, which showed signs of human remains being burned. Notably, a human pelvic bone fragment was discovered, which had been mistakenly included with Teresa's remains. This discovery suggests that Teresa's remains may have been intentionally placed in Stephen's burn pit. Unfortunately, his defense was denied the chance to examine these bones because the prosecution failed to disclose them. Kathleen claimed that this was a Brady violation, meaning that crucial evidence that could have helped exonerate Stephen was not provided in time. Despite this setback, Kathleen continued to investigate the case from a new angle, which could lead to the identification of a new suspect. Kathleen decided to investigate the Bobby family's computer as an alternative to testing the bone fragments. The computer analysis revealed several disturbing findings, including violent and pornographic images of women being tortured and videos showing women as victims. These materials were accessed at times when Bobby was supposedly at home. Furthermore, Barbara Taddick, Bobby and Brendan's mother, her husband Scott, and Stephen's sister seemed to be conceal evidence to avoid implicating Bobby. The forensic team successfully recovered 2,449 pages of data from the computer, including all of Bobby's searches, videos, and photos, and transferred it to a CD-ROM as evidence for the retrial. Bobby is the older brother of Brendan and the nephew of Stephen. During his uncle Stephen's trial, Bobby served as the prosecution's key eyewitness. According to Bobby, the last time he saw Teresa, she was heading towards Stephen's house. Later that afternoon, after returning from hunting, Bobby claimed that he was unable to find Teresa or her car. Brad Dassey, the half-brother of Bobby, has made several claims that have added. He believes Stephen is innocent. Additionally, Brad has stated that Barbara and Scott erased the computer's history, including all pornographic content. A key piece of evidence could potentially clear Stephen and Brendan's names, while further implicating Bobby. An eyewitness, Thomas Sawinski, has come forward claiming to have seen Bobby with an older man pushing Teresa's SUV back into the salvage yard. Thomas stated that he was driving to deliver newspapers when he saw the duo. As he passed them, Bobby attempted to stop him by stepping into the road. Thomas swerved to avoid Bobby and continued on his route. Thomas described Bobby as appearing unhappy to see him there. After learning about the SUV's discovery, Thomas contacted police to share what he had seen. However, the police rejected this, who told him they already knew who is the culprit. New testimony has cast doubt on the credibility of the prosecution's key witness, Bobby. Kathleen believes that if Thomas's claims are true, then Bobby's entire statement is false. She argued that the rejection of key evidence supporting Stephen's case deprived him of the opportunity to prove his innocence for years. The appeals court is considering the new evidence and make a decision in November 2022. Kathleen continues to represent those she believes have been wrongfully convicted. However, throughout the process, Brendan has maintained his innocence. The question remains as to whether Stephen is truly guilty. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Wilcox. Nicholas Wilcox, a 39-year-old man from Putnam, Connecticut, lives in a duplex apartment, a popular property type in Florida that is designed for two families, with separate rooms, yards, and entrances. Isabella, a 38-year-old woman from Brazil, was the first person invited to rent one of the vacant apartments by Nicholas Wilcox. She used to work as a flight attendant for a national airline in Brazil. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to America with her children and later married an American, which helped her obtain a green card. Isabella's marriage ended in 2016, and she started dating Eric Robinson, a 46-year-old man from Massachusetts who had never been married and had no children. Despite their romantic feelings for each other, their relationship was occasionally turbulent due to their passionate nature and Eric's bachelor lifestyle. According to Isabella, Eric's behavior was inconsistent and unpredictable, switching between cheerfulness and aggression without warning. This led to repeated breakups and makeups. By June 2017, they had separated once again, shortly before Eric and Isabella moved in with Nicholas. Initially, the living arrangement worked well, with Nicholas and Isabella and Eric respecting each other's space while also spending quality time together. However, over time, problems arose. It was discovered that Eric was using and storing illicit substances, which explained his erratic mood swings. This behavior led to Eric's arrest on August 23, 2017. Nicholas was fortunate to have a steady stream of work, unlike Isabella, who struggled to find a suitable job. To make ends meet, she started helping her neighbor in the construction business. It's worth noting that Nicholas's family had a long history of working in similar trades. His grandfather was a fisherman and boat builder, while his father dedicated his life to construction. After graduating in 1996, Nicholas joined the family business, becoming a roofer. He worked alongside his older brother, Donald, as contractors, building their own client base. At 23, Nicholas started a family with his high school classmate, Kathy. They had a daughter a year later, and twins 3 years after that. Throughout this time, Nicholas worked hard to provide for his family. Despite his busy schedule, friends and acquaintances remembered him as a devoted husband and father. However, his dedication to his professional pursuits may have contributed to the eventual breakdown of his family. They divorced shortly after the birth of their younger children. Despite this, Nicholas continued to support and communicate with his family. In 2017, Nicholas made a fresh start by moving to Florida to pursue better job opportunities. The new location proved to be a smart choice, as he saw a significant increase in clients. Unlike his previous seasonal work, Nicholas was now able to earn a steady income almost year-round. As a professional, Nicholas's skills were in high demand in Florida, where powerful hurricanes frequently damaged homes along the coast during storm season. His expertise was needed to reinforce and repair homes, which helped him build a successful business. Despite leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas remained committed to caring for his children from a distance, sending them financial support and visiting whenever possible, as per his agreement with his ex-wife. After living in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale, Nicholas moved to the suburbs to lower his housing costs. This is when he met Isabella. As the hurricane season began, Nicholas's workload increased significantly due to daily orders. At the same time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where Nicholas lived and worked. An emergency was declared, and about 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. To prepare for the storm, Nicholas spent his time reinforcing homes, boarding up windows and doors, and later clearing the debris left behind. Nicholas's main job was to help people, and he got paid for it. But he wasn't in it just for the money. His older brother said that Nicholas always lent a hand to those in need. In September 2017, Florida was bracing for a devastating hurricane. Nicholas spent the day boarding up windows with plywood to prepare. As a result, there was a shortage of plywood in stores, leading to long lines of people waiting to buy some. At that time, Nicholas met a woman named Pamela, who was struggling to find materials to protect her home. Nicholas promised to help her, and that evening, he delivered the 7 sheets of plywood she needed. He then spent the whole day boarding up her doors and windows, refusing payment for his efforts. Nicholas was deeply sympathetic to Pamela's plight as a single mother in need of assistance. In response, he offered her help, and she was extremely grateful. This sparked a romantic connection between them. The devastating hurricane that followed brought Nicholas a substantial amount of work, which allowed him to employ his neighbor, Isabella, as his assistant. Isabella's responsibilities included cleaning up job sites and handing Nicholas tools as needed. As they spent more time together, their friendly interactions blossomed into romance. On September 3rd, they made a commitment to each other, sealing their promise with a handwritten vow in blood, symbolizing their desire for a long, happy life together, filled with many children. The lovers, Nicholas and Isabella, faced minor issues and disagreements soon after their union. These disputes escalated, culminating in a serious conflict on September 22nd, which led Isabella to leave home and spend the night in a hotel. However, they reconciled the next morning. According to Isabella, Nicholas was neglecting her and showing a lack of respect. Nicholas, on the other hand, believed she was exaggerating. Their disagreements ultimately led to severe consequences. On October 5, 2017, a mysterious call was made to the local police. The caller claimed to be Isabella's former husband and asked the police to contact Isabella, stating she had information about a recent crime. However, he didn't provide further details. The police responded promptly and called Isabella, who sounded hysterical. When questioned about the situation, she claimed everything was fine, except for a fight with her boyfriend, Nicholas. Isabella told the police that her partner had left her and driven away, but when they mentioned a call from her former husband, she broke down and confessed that her partner was actually dead. She claimed to know where the body was and offered to show them. When the police arrived at the address Isabella provided, they found a house that was being prepared for a hurricane, with all windows and doors boarded up. Inside, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and paint, indicating that one of the bedrooms had been thoroughly cleaned. However, upon closer inspection, the detectives suspected that someone was trying to cover something up. The walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, and they found containers of hydrogen peroxide, which is often used to clean bloodstains. They discovered small bloodstains on the bedding and bedside table, and it was clear that the old mattress had been replaced. The police found blood stains throughout the room, suggesting a violent crime had taken place. Isabella had attempted to clean up the scene but hadn't finished before the police arrived. Isabella was discovered inside the duplex, visibly distressed, and explained that she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call with her ex-husband, which accounted for her unusual behavior. Despite her initial confusion, Isabella confirmed that she knew what had happened in the room and where the body was located. Due to her unstable state, the police decided to take her to the station for further questioning. Meanwhile, the police had spoken with her ex-husband again, who provided a partial account of the events. According to Isabella's ex-husband, she had called him and told him about the crime. However, during her interrogation, Isabella claimed that her former boyfriend, Eric Robinson, was involved in the crime. She stated that on October 5th, around 2 a.m., Eric had arrived at the duplex, found her and Nicholas asleep, and became enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. Eric woke Isabella by holding a knife to her throat, threatening to harm her if she screamed. As he did, she saw Nicholas, who was lying next to her, struggling to breathe. But Eric didn't allow her to look any further and forced her out of the bedroom. Then, he brutally beat Nicholas, who was defenseless, using a brass knuckle and the bat. After the beating, Eric wrapped Nicholas' body in a tarp and tied it up with straps. He threatened Isabella, forcing her to help him get rid of the body. Later, the detectives were confused as to why Isabella, instead of calling the police, had called her ex-husband. In an explanation, Isabella said she was terrified and sought comfort and guidance. According to her, Eric also made her clean up the crime scene and erase all evidence. Before leaving, he returned her phone, which he had taken earlier. Her confession raised doubts and required further investigation. Additionally, the detectives noticed visible bruises and scratches on Isabella's body, which she claimed were a result of Eric beating her after Nicholas' death. The investigation started with a search for the victim and the suspect, who revealed the location of Nicholas. While medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement searched for Eric, who had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, Eric had met a woman, Merida, and was staying with her. Merida told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call and left immediately. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and left again without explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida said she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Eric was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and was taken into custody for further inquiry. During the interrogation, Eric provided a different account of the events than Isabella's. According to Eric, Isabella had contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite having a restraining order against him. Isabella attacked Nicholas while under the influence of banned substances and ultimately ended his life. After regaining her composure, she realized she needed help and asked Eric to assist her. In exchange, she promised to rekindle their relationship and start anew. Eric, still having strong feelings for her, agreed to her terms. The investigation revealed that Isabella was not as innocent as she seemed. She had a history of police encounters, and on September 22nd, a heated argument with Nicholas got out of hand. Under the influence of Xanax and other substances, Isabella became violent, destroying some of Nicholas' belongings and damaging his work vehicle. Fearing for his life, Nicholas contacted the police. Although they reconciled the next morning and Nicholas dropped the complaint, investigators discovered Isabella's history of erratic behavior, including a conversation with her ex-husband that shed more light on her past. He described Isabella as having a volatile personality and a hot temper. During their argument, he had threatened to report her to immigration services if she continued to behave in such a manner. For Isabella, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was crucial, so the threat of deportation was devastating. It's possible that during another argument, Isabella's explosive personality led her to react violently, motivated by her desire to stay in America. To gather more information, detectives started interviewing people close to them. A neighbor who lived in the adjacent duplex proved to be a crucial witness. She reported seeing Eric arrive at the scene in his car on the night of the crime. He then retrieved some tools and trash bags before leaving the area. The investigation continued, with substantial evidence collected. On October 11th, Isabella was called in for another interrogation, which she attended voluntarily since she had not been arrested at that point. Detectives reviewed video surveillance footage and determined that on the night of the incident, Isabella personally moved Nicholas's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this time, she remained calm and composed, making decisions independently. She also met with Eric Robinson that night. Isabella appeared relaxed and friendly. She even purchased items needed for emergency repairs herself. However, as the investigation progressed, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella claimed that Eric had threatened to kill her and deport her and her children, forcing her to act as she did. Although her statement seemed believable, investigators were cautious in their conclusions. Both Eric and Isabella had questionable pasts, which raised suspicions. Eric, in particular, had a history of run-ins with the law, dating back to 2001, primarily for possession and distribution of narcotics. In August 2016, Isabella had legitimate reasons to fear Eric in question, as he had committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was arrested for strangulation and later that year for possessing prohibited substances. Eric's neighbors were terrified of him due to his aggressive and unpredictable behavior, and they actively avoided him. On October 14th, experts discovered traces of Isabella DNA on the Nicholas body, contradicting her claim of not having touched Nicholas. This evidence suggested that she was involved in the violent crime against her lover, at the very least in disposing of the body and eliminating evidence. Despite the evidence, neither Isabella or Eric admitted to any wrongdoing. While Eric was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Although everyone expected the court proceedings to begin soon, various complications and delays pushed the trial back by 5 years. The trial of Eric Robinson was significantly delayed due to the bureaucratic issues. During this time, the prosecution developed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed the investigation findings. Additionally, new evidence was discovered, including the recovery of Eric's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime with his former friend. As the trial approached, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution. She agreed to testify against Eric Robinson. On April 10, 2023, the trial finally took place. The prosecution argued that Eric was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas, while Isabella's role was presented as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, a crime in itself. The trial was marked by several cancellations due to legal complexities, but resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Eric was charged with premeditated murder. Despite inconsistencies in Isabella's testimonies, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution emphasized witness statements describing Eric's unusual behavior on the night of the crime. Specifically, Eric used his new girlfriend's car, which didn't have GPS tracking, to avoid detection. He also left his mobile phone at home to prevent tracking. Separately, other case details came to light. After the crime, Eric and Isabella were together in a room nearby, where they were intimate. Isabella later explained her actions, stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives at the time and also feared for her life after what had happened. The motive behind the brutal and senseless murder of Nicholas was revealed to be jealousy. Although Isabella had ended their relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. When he was released from prison, he returned home to find that significant changes had taken place in his absence, which only fueled his rage and hatred. During this time, Eric plotted his revenge against his perceived rival. He committed a cold-blooded attack while Nicholas was asleep and vulnerable, sealing his fate with the first strike. Eric then attempted to cover his tracks by scattering evidence in various locations. The murder weapon was later found in a landfill, and Nicholas's body was discovered wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Isabella, following Eric's instructions, painted over the blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area to conceal the evidence. Ultimately, 51-year-old Eric was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for second-degree murder. Isabella was found guilty of aiding Eric, but the court considered threats and coercion as mitigating circumstances. As a result, she received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Isabella was willing to do whatever it took to gain U.S. citizenship. Just 10 days after Eric was incarcerated, the parties signed another agreement in which Eric promised to marry Isabella. However, he failed to follow through on this promise. It seems that Isabella is willing to marry anyone as long as it helps her maintain her status. All the men she has been involved with have been used for her own selfish purposes, and she has manipulated them into considering marriage. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, to Ray and Goldie Donald. He was the oldest of 3 children and was affectionately known as Donnie by his parents. Following his birth, the family relocated to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community in the Appalachian Mountains. Despite struggling with poverty, they was loving and nurturing to their children. However, their marriage began to deteriorate due to their economic struggles. As a child, Donald was quiet and mostly kept to himself, showing no apparent signs of abnormality. However, he suffered a traumatic past, being sexually abused and assaulted by at least 3 men. The perpetrators included his uncle on his mother's side, who molested him during visits to his grandmother's home, and an older neighbor who offered him money for sexual favors. Additionally, at the age of 18, Donald claimed to have been sexually assaulted by his roommate, Randy White. While a traumatic past can contribute to the development of psychological issues, Donald was often perceived as a loner in school. He preferred to focus on his studies and rarely participated in extracurricular activities, opting to read instead. Although this helped him earn good grades, it also led to teasing and the label of teacher's pet. After graduating from Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald enrolled in Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good academic record, he soon found himself bored with the daily routine and decided to drop out. However, he eventually earned his diploma through a correspondence school in Chicago and received his general education development at the age of 16. With no clear future plans, Donald struggled to figure out his life's direction. He eventually moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he landed a job at a local factory. However, when the factory closed down in 1970, Donald lost his job and was left uncertain about his future. Around that time, his mother called and asked him to visit his ailing grandfather, who was in Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. Donald agreed to the visit. During his daily visits to see his ailing grandfather, Donald formed strong relationships with the hospital workers, who grew to genuinely like him. Their admiration for him led to an unexpected job offer. Although it is unclear what motivated Donald to want to work as a nurse's aide, some speculate that he needed to earn a living after losing his previous job. Despite lacking formal training in nursing or medicine, the hospital staff entrusted him with responsibilities. Donald's job at the hospital involved caring for patients on his own, including tasks like changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and giving medications. Despite the challenges, Donald's early weeks at the hospital passed without incident. However, on the evening of May 31, 1970, Donald was attending to 88-year-old stroke patient Logan Evans in a private room. Suddenly, Evans rubbed his own feces on Donald's face. While it's likely Evans wasn't fully aware of his actions due to the effects of his stroke, the incident triggered something within Donald, leading him to completely lose control. Without realizing what he was doing, Donald suffocated Evans with a blue plastic bag and a pillow until the patient was motionless. He then checked Evans' pulse with a stethoscope to confirm his death. Following the killing, Donald disposed of the plastic bag, cleaned Evans' body, dressed him in a fresh gown, and showered him before notifying the nurses about the patient's passing. After the first incident, no one suspected anything out of the ordinary. Donald went to cover the patient with a sheet, but instead, he used his hand to smother him to death. It was surprising that he was able to do this without anyone noticing, especially since he used a pillow to kill him. The next day, Donald was assigned to care for another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. He made a critical mistake by using the wrong size catheter on him. When James realized what was happening, he yelled at Donald to remove it. Donald used his hand to restrain him, which caused him to vomit blood and eventually die from an air embolism. Once again, no one suspected foul play. With no one suspecting him of any wrongdoing after his first 2 murders, he became more confident and careless. Just 3 weeks after the first murder, Donald deliberately cut off the oxygen tank of 42-year-old patient Elizabeth Wyatt. He later claimed that he had ended her suffering, as she had expressed a desire to die. A nurse found Elizabeth dead 4 hours later, but no one questioned Donald about her death. Over the next 10 months, he took advantage of the lack of suspicion and killed 15 more patients under his care. He saw this as an opportunity to indulge his darker impulses, and he continued to kill without being detected. Donald's methods of murder varied widely, driven by a desire for pleasure or experimentation. He would often use smothering, sabotage oxygen tanks, inject lethal drugs, or overdose patients with medication. When angered, his methods became even more brutal. On one occasion, he inserted a coat hanger through a patient's catheter after an argument, puncturing the patient's bladder and bowel, which led to infection and death a few days later. Despite the brutality of his actions, Donald considered himself a mercy killer, the self-proclaimed angel of death who was playing God with vulnerable patients. He cloaked his horrific deeds in a mask of kindness, believing that his actions were somehow merciful. On March 31, 1971, the day he was arrested for burglary while drunk, Donald's life took a turn. In his incoherent confession, he revealed his dark secret to the police, but no one took him seriously. As a result, he faced only charges of petty theft and paid a fine instead of serving prison time. This close call prompted Donald to attempt to turn his life around. For a few months, he tried to regain stability and eventually landed a part-time job as a nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June 1973, Donald started a second nursing job at Good Samaritan Hospital in Lexington. He held both nursing positions simultaneously before eventually moving on. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he took on 2 non-nursing roles, a telephone operator in Lexington and a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Notably, Donald was able to resist his urge to kill during this period. A possible explanation is that he had limited access to patients in these new roles, which may have also contributed to his decision to change jobs frequently. Donald's struggle to control his killing urges eventually became too much to manage, leading him to relocate to Cincinnati, Ohio in September 1975. He found employment at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital, working various roles including nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, and autopsy assistant. The hospital's night shift schedule and lack of supervision gave him unrestricted access to all areas of the hospital. Over the next decade, Donald murdered at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. He meticulously documented each crime in a diary, detailing the methods he used to kill his victims. These methods included poisoning patients' food and drinks, suffocating them with plastic bags and towels, and injecting them with lethal substances. Donald's experimentation with different methods was influenced by his study of medical journals, which he used to refine his techniques and avoid detection. Donald preferred cyanide as his method of murder, which he mixed into patients' food or administered through their gastric tubes. He accumulated a large stash of cyanide, approximately 30 pounds, which he stole from the hospital over time and kept at home for safekeeping. He stated that he began using morphine to kill patients in the 1970s, particularly in small hospitals in Kentucky where it was not heavily regulated. He also mentioned he used other methods, such as cyanide, arsenic, adhesive cleaner, and suffocation with a plastic bag. Despite the numerous deaths, he claimed to have avoided suspicion by making them appear accidental or due to natural causes. He revealed that in reality, he was a serial killer hiding in plain sight, preying on vulnerable patients. He took it upon himself to decide who lived or died, often without the patients' or their families' consent. He justified his actions as merciful, but he acknowledged that the truth was more complex. While he claimed that his crimes were motivated by compassion, other evidence suggested otherwise. He recounted that a turning point came in the early 1980s when his behavior became more erratic and driven by rage. He started dating a man named Doug Hill, but their relationship was tumultuous. After a heated argument, he poisoned Doug's ice cream with arsenic, and fortunately, Doug survived. This incident marked the first time he tried to harm someone outside of the hospital, revealing a darker side to his nature. Donald's behavior took a dark turn after a fight with Carl Heller. He moved in with Carl Heller, but the relationship quickly became toxic. Donald's jealousy and paranoia led him to suspect Heller of cheating, and he started lacing Carl's food with arsenic to keep her from leaving. As time passed, Donald's cruel actions extended beyond his home. He poisoned a female neighbor's drink with hepatitis serum during an argument, and she almost died before receiving treatment. Unfortunately, another neighbor, Helen Metzger, was not as fortunate. Donald poisoned one of her pies with arsenic, which ultimately led to her death. Donald's lack of consequences for his crimes emboldened him, and he became more confident and reckless. He felt like he was above the law, having gotten away with multiple murders. In April 1983, Donald's behavior escalated. After a disagreement with Heller's parents, he began secretly poisoning their food with small doses of arsenic. The following month, Carl's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was hospitalized. During a visit, Donald saw an opportunity to strike again and laced Henry's pudding with arsenic. Henry died that night. Over the next year, Donald continued to target Carl's mother, Margaret, periodically poisoning her in an attempt to kill her. In January 1984, Donald's relationship with his partner, Carl, ended, and he was asked to leave their home. Donald reacted poorly to the breakup and spent the next 2 years trying to harm Carl using poison. He also attempted to kill one of Carl's female friends in a separate incident, but was unsuccessful. Although Donald did manage to hospitalize Carl at one point, his attempts to kill her ultimately failed. Donald's behavior raised suspicions on July 18, 1985, when security guards at his workplace discovered a suspicious collection of items in his gym bag. The contents included a gun, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, medical texts, occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sobridge. As a result of the discovery, Donald was fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property and given the option to resign from his job quietly. Surprisingly, the incident was not documented in his work record, and the hospital did not investigate Donald for potential involvement in other crimes during his employment. He was able to secure a new job as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati just 7 months later, in February 1986. Donald Harvey's new employers were impressed by his work and soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Unbeknownst to them, Donald had a dark past, and he quickly fell back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, he murdered 26 more patients and attempted to kill several others by tampering with their life support machines, injecting them with lethal substances, and suffocating them. The murder spree finally came to an end on March 7, 1987, with the death of 44-year-old John Powell. Powell had been recovering from a motorcycle accident, but his sudden and mysterious death raised suspicions. Due to Ohio's law requiring an autopsy in cases of vehicular homicide, the authorities were able to investigate Powell's death. During the autopsy, the assistant coroner detected a faint scent of almonds, a sign of cyanide poisoning. This discovery led the authorities to launch an investigation into Powell's death. Initially, they suspected Powell's friends and family, but they found no evidence or motive. The focus then shifted to hospital employees who had access to Powell's room, and Donald Harvey was one of the individuals they needed to rule out. Hospital employees were voluntarily taking polygraph tests to clear their names. Donald Harvey also was offered to take a test, but he didn't follow through. Instead, he called in sick on the day of his scheduled test. He had even purchased a book on how to cheat on lie detector tests. This raised suspicions, especially when investigators discovered his notorious nickname, Angel of Death, and learned about his questionable partner from the hospital. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on Donald due to the unusual number of deaths surrounding him. During questioning, Donald initially denied any involvement in John Powell's murder, claiming he was just a victim of circumstance. However, after hours of interrogation, he eventually confessed to putting cyanide in Powell's feeding tube. He claimed he did it out of sympathy for Powell and his family, but denied responsibility for the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody, and investigators began searching for more evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald, then 35, confessed to committing 33 murders over the past 17 years. As the investigation continued, the number of murders he confessed to grew to 70. Donald's claims of multiple murders raised suspicions among investigators, who questioned the accuracy of the numbers he provided. To verify his credibility, they ordered a series of psychiatric evaluations by multiple experts. The tests concluded that Donald was sane and competent, able to distinguish right from wrong and conform to the law. In 1987, Donald was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders committed at Mary's Mount Hospital. The following year, he pleaded guilty to 3 additional murders and 3 attempted murders in Cincinnati, receiving 3 life sentences and 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. After a 2-year investigation, the remaining cases were closed due to insufficient evidence linking Donald to the crimes. The public was both shocked by Donald's actions, and many wondered what drove him to commit such heinous crimes. In a 1991 interview with the Columbus Dispatch, Donald revealed that his motivation stemmed from a desire for control. He felt that others had controlled him for 18 years, and he sought to reclaim power over his own life. Donald admitted that he enjoyed the sense of power that came with deciding who lived or died. Donald Harvey is one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, not only due to the high number of victims but also because he targeted people he knew personally, including his patients. An Associated Press article from 2001 listed him as the worst serial killer in the United States. Contrary to expectations that Donald would spend the rest of his life in prison and die of natural causes, his life took a different turn. On March 28, 2017, Donald was found severely beaten in his cell at the Toledo Correctional Institution, where he was being held in protective custody. He died 2 days later from severe head injuries. Months later, an inmate named James Elliott confessed to the crime in a letter to the Toledo Blade. James, who was serving a 37-year sentence for multiple burglaries, claimed that he had committed the murder to bring closure to the families of Donald's victims, who were from his hometown in Kentucky. In his letter, James wrote that he hoped his actions would bring some solace to the victims' families, as Donald had not received the punishment he deserved from the courts. In September 2019, James was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the notorious Angel of Death. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sierra Lamar. In March 2012, the Lamar family, consisting of Steve, a computer expert, his wife Marlene, and their two daughters, Danielle and Sierra, living in Fremont, California. Sierra was younger sister. She was born on October 19, 1996. Both girls had a relatively comfortable upbringing, with the usual ups and downs that come with family life. However, a disturbing fact about their father's past had a profound impact on the family. When Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father, Steve, was involved in a serious incident involving inappropriate behavior with one of their roommates during a sleepover. As a result, Steve was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Despite Steve's past convictions, both Sierra and Danielle reported having a good relationship with him, describing him as a kind and respected father. However, when Marlene learned about the incident, they decided to end their relationship, which was already struggling. Marlene soon moved on and started a new relationship. Despite this, both Sierra and Danielle attended Washington High School in their community, where they enjoyed socializing and performed reasonably well academically. Sierra was a cheerful and lively girl who was well-liked at school. She enjoyed participating in dance competitions and cheerleading. In October 2011, her mother, Marlene, decided to move from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a town located 40 miles southwest. Sierra, her mother, and her mother's boyfriend, Rick Gardner, settled into a rented ranch-style home on a rural cul-de-sac. However, Sierra was initially unhappy about leaving behind her close friends and hobbies in Fremont. She struggled to adjust to her new school, Sobrato High, where she didn't receive the same warm welcome she had at Washington High. Despite this, Sierra eventually settled in and made new friends, earning the respect and even joining the cheerleading squad again. By March 2012, Sierra had adapted well to her new environment. On March 11th, she had a conversation with her father and her sister, who still lived in Fremont, and updated them on her progress. The conversation was mostly positive, with Sierra expressing excitement about an upcoming school project, wanting to get her hair colored, and discussing her homework with her sister. Her academic performance seemed to be going well. Sierra ended her Thursday evening chat with Danielle and Steve after dinner, as she had school the next day and it was getting late. They agreed to part ways and promised to catch up soon, unaware that this would be their last conversation. The next morning, February 16, 2012, Sierra got ready for school, locking the house behind her. At 6:29 a.m., she tweeted a friend, then put on her shoes and left to catch the bus. The bus stop was located on a desolate road between Palm and Dewey Avenues, far from Sierra's school, Sobrato High. Many students, including Sierra, had to cross this road daily to catch the bus. At 7:11 a.m., Sierra texted a friend to meet up before class. However, when the bus arrived at 7:11 and 15 seconds a.m., Sierra was missing. Sierra didn't show up to school, which her friends found unusual. However, they didn't think it was serious enough to report to the school authorities. The day went on as usual. When the school day ended, Marlene, Sierra's mom, tried to contact Sierra, but her call went straight to voicemail. Although Marlene thought this was strange, she didn't get worried. However, when she got home and saw that Sierra's room was still empty, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to ask if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, the answer was no. When Marlene called Danielle and a few other friends, they all left with the same message that Sierra could not be found. Marlene began to panic when she called Sierra's high school and discovered that she had missed all her classes. After her calling the authorities, officers were immediately sent to the pedo-Hispanic court. They began by speaking with those closest to Sierra. including several of her friends, who were all candid about the difficulties Sierra and her family were facing. Although Sierra was generally content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce forced her to leave her family and old friends behind. Authorities initially thought that Sierra might have left voluntarily, as she had previously mentioned returning to Fremont in a light-hearted and sometimes serious manner. However, there were several things that contradicted this theory. Sierra had stopped posting on social media, her phone was turned off, and all calls went straight to voicemail. She also never arrived at the front door of her home. Her loved ones launched a massive search despite police downplaying her disappearance. The investigation into Sierra's disappearance led to a complex trail of evidence. 2 days after she vanished, data forensics began examining her phone's previous activity. They discovered that her phone had briefly turned on in the middle of the night, before turning off again. The phone's coordinates pointed to a field near Sierra's house, which became a crucial lead in the investigation. A search crew thoroughly searched the fields where Sierra's phone had last been detected. Within minutes, they found the Samsung Galaxy phone she had been using. It was near the road, damaged, and had likely been thrown from a vehicle. Investigators concluded that Sierra hadn't turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they believed that rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. This coincidence was crucial, as the entire investigation hinged on the discovery of her phone. The case took a disturbing turn when detectives realized that Sierra's phone was probably thrown from a moving vehicle. There were no footprints, tire tracks, or other visible evidence. The next day, a search crew made another discovery. Sierra's backpack was found 2 kilometers from her house, discarded outside a barn. The bag contained her schoolwork, inhaler, and money, suggesting that she had been on her way to school and was forcibly separated from her essential items. Additionally, a complete outfit, believed to be the one Sierra was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This outfit included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. The outfit was subjected to DNA testing, which yielded results. Specifically, her pants contained male foreign DNA, suggesting that she had likely been assaulted. The discovery of Sierra's phone and clothing led to a surge of local and international sympathy. The search effort, which had already intensified significantly in the days following her disappearance, received a fresh wave of support. Authorities received over 1,000 new tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Multiple search teams, comprising over 800 individuals, were deployed to thoroughly search the area. They systematically examined every available lake and reservoir, combed over fields, and searched abandoned buildings. Sierra's disappearance was a major topic of discussion in the community, with missing person posters put up everywhere. Her parents offered a $10,000 reward for any credible information leading to her safe return. Despite the efforts of the community and investigators, only a golf ball and a flipper were found. However, unbeknownst to the public, investigators were making progress in identifying a potential suspect. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, on March 28, DNA analysis revealed that the DNA on her pants belonged to a local man. As part of the investigation, DNA samples from all 57 registered sex offenders in the Morgan Hill zip code were compared to the DNA evidence. Sierra's father, who had a criminal record, proactively contacted law enforcement and was quickly eliminated as a suspect. One of the local men who had not been ruled out as a suspect was Antolin Garcia Torres. Following a DNA match between the 21-year-old man and Sierra's pants, he came to public attention. At the time, he lived in Maple Leaf Recreational Vehicle Park with his mother, pregnant wife, and daughter, about 7 miles from Sierra's house. Antolin Garcia Torres had a troubling past, had a challenging upbringing marked by abuse and neglect. His father, who was abusive and often drunk, had threatened to kill him and his mother before being imprisoned for molesting a young family member. The father's abusive behavior appears to have been passed on to his son. Although 2009 allegations of having sex with a minor were dismissed, Antolin Garcia Torres's DNA was collected. He was also detained in 2010 for impeding police operations. Due to the suspicious relationship between he and Sierra, detectives put him under constant surveillance. As it was unclear whether Sierra was still alive, Antolin Garcia Torres was the most likely person to have information. To monitor his activities, police tapped his phone, placed a GPS tracker in his car, and had 2 undercover investigators move into a vehicle park next to his house. After discovering that the vehicle park had cameras at the front door, investigators began reviewing security footage from the neighborhood around Antolin Garcia Torres's residence. They examined a film taken on the day of Sierra's disappearance to determine whether Antolin had left or arrived home. It was discovered that Antolin had left the campground in his red Volkswagen Jetta at 7 a.m. on the morning she vanished. Given that his home was only 7 miles from Sierra, Antolin's travel time matched the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped. Although Antolin had left for work at the usual time, Safeway's shift records showed that he did not arrive at work on Sierra went missing. It was found that 3 years prior, there were 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts in the Safeway parking lot. But none of the perpetrators were identified or detained. The only evidence from these attempts was a taser dropped by the perpetrator, which had a fingerprint on one of its batteries. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, requiring a direct one-to-one comparison to match. The idea seemed promising, but when Antolin's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a surprising revelation emerged. In reality, their suspect was indeed Antolin. Antolin was taken into custody by investigators after being positively identified as someone who was present when Sierra went missing. His DNA was found on her pants, and he had a history of involvement in kidnappings. This evidence was enough to detain him for questioning and to seize his vehicle for further DNA testing. During the interview, the suspect, Antolin, showed arrogance and was dismissive of the questions. He claimed that on the day Sierra vanished, he had gone fishing and didn't know who she was. He was confident that the investigators wouldn't find any evidence against him. However, before the interview ended, Antolin made a strange revelation. He admitted to having a habit of strangling a snake while driving and then throwing the tissue out the window. He also claimed to have thrown out a used tissue in the exact spot where Sierra's bag was found on the morning she went missing. We already had a 1 in a million chance with the rain on Sierra's phone, and the police didn't believe Antolin's implausible explanation either. On May 21, 2012, Antolin Garcia Torres was formally detained in connection with Sierra Lamar's disappearance outside his workplace in a Safeway parking lot. This was the result of several distinct links between Sierra and Antolin's vehicle. A DNA test found her DNA on the interior door handle of the car's rear door. Additionally, fibers from the car seats matched those found on Sierra's clothing, and a piece of rope inside the car contained a strand of her hair. This proved beyond a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. However, even after his arrest, there was a significant issue. Despite the apparent evidence, Sierra's body had yet to be found. Could they accuse Antolin of first-degree murder without a body or verified death? In reality, Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced on May 19, 2014, that he would seek the death penalty against Antolin. Although Antolin had previously pleaded not guilty to killing Sierra, the overwhelming evidence pointed to his guilt. Antolin's trial began on January 30, 2017, after being delayed. The trial was prolonged and stressful for all parties involved, with the prosecution and defense presenting lengthy arguments over 13 weeks of testimony. Antolin's defense team argued that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields during his childhood may have impaired his cognitive abilities. They claimed that this exposure was not his fault and, as a result, he should not be eligible for the death penalty. The defense argued that Antolin faced a unique disadvantage due to circumstances beyond his control. In a final attempt, Antolin's defense team requested a new trial, questioning the chief investigator's reliability and honesty, and alleging that he had tampered with evidence in the past. However, this attempt was denied. The jury convicted Antolin Garcia Torres of Sierra Lamar's first-degree murder on May 9, 2017. The evidence was so overwhelming against Antolin that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Sierra's body has never been located. Outside of the evidence offered, Antolin was formally given a life sentence without the chance of parole after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Antolin has stayed largely silent, and despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, only one letter has been answered. Antolin wrote, "I hold fast to my innocence, and I'm not going to talk about the matter." It's puzzling why Antolin continues to claim innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The presence of his DNA on Sierra's belongings, her DNA in his car, his past crimes, and a detailed timeline all clearly indicate his involvement in Sierra's disappearance. The search for Sierra Lamar is believed by some organizers to be the longest continuous search for a missing person in U.S. history. It spanned 3 years, with over 1,100 searches conducted within a 15-mile radius, totaling 50,000 man-hours of effort. Volunteers braved extreme weather conditions, from scorching summers to cold winters, in their quest for any information about Sierra. Despite the passing of time, many volunteers continue to search for her, driven by the desire to bring closure to her family, even though they acknowledge the likelihood of her being deceased. Currently, the whereabouts of Sierra's body remain unknown, but the hope is that one day, the Lamar family will find the closure they seek. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Wilma Anderson. Wilma Anderson is the daughter of Linda and Marcus Anderson. Her parents' divorce later left difficulties in the family, making Wilma's living situation unstable. Although she could not live with both parents, her mother was always interested in her life. Wilma lived with her older sister Emily. Wilma is an active and ambitious girl. She likes to share her life on social networks, often posting photos on Facebook. Wilma loves being in front of the camera, showing her creativity and cheerful personality. Wilma met Tishko Ahmed Shabazz in Sweden when she was 15 years old. At that time, Tishko was 20 years old. Because the age of sexual consent in Sweden is 15, their relationship did not cause any legal problems. Although initially apprehensive about the 5-year age gap, Wilma's mother trusted her daughter's decision and eventually accepted Tishko. Tishko was originally from Iraq but moved to Sweden with his family when he was 8 years old. Tishko lived with his father and stepmother. During his school years, Tishko faced bullying, but as he grew older, he developed a strong determination to overcome any challenges he faced. In 2014, Tishko became a Swedish citizen, and after completing his studies in 2018, Tishko found a job in the care industry. Wilma and Tishko moved in together in Uddevalla, Sweden. Over time, Tishko became increasingly controlling, and Wilma's mother noticed a change in her daughter's behavior during the 2 years Wilma lived with Tishko. Wilma often confided in her sister Emily about her difficult relationship with Tishko. On November 14, 2019, Wilma told Emily over the phone that she was ending her relationship with Tishko. She was exhausted by Tishko's control over every aspect of her life, including what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, and how she applied her makeup. Feeling suffocated and desperate to end the relationship, she said she had to pack up and leave before Tishko got home from work. Emily tried to contact Wilma, but her calls went unanswered. The next day, November 15th, Wilma missed her dentist appointment. 2 days later, November 17th, Wilma's parents came to the apartment she shared with Tishko. After several knocks, Tishko opened the door, apparently intoxicated. Wilma's mother, Linda, asked Tishko about Wilma's whereabouts. He admitted that their relationship was over and that Wilma had left after taking her things. Tishko claimed that he did not know where Wilma was. Wilma's parents entered the apartment, hoping to find out more. Tishko recounted the argument that led to the breakup, with him and Wilma having a heated argument when he returned home from work around 5:30 p.m. Initially, her parents were not too concerned, as Tishko and Wilma's relationship was unstable. Emily, extremely concerned about Wilma's disappearance, created a Facebook post seeking information about Wilma. Normally, Wilma always contacted her family, so the lack of contact was very unusual. In the post, Emily described Wilma's appearance as 165 centimeters tall with black hair. After the posts were posted on social media, the police got involved. They interviewed Emily and other family members and began searching for anyone who may have come into contact with Wilma. However, neither Linda nor Emily had heard from her since her disappearance. With an extensive search effort underway, a combined task force of police, friends, and family set out to track Wilma using dogs and drone technology. When police approached Tishko for questioning, he claimed to have no knowledge of Wilma's disappearance or whereabouts, confirming that he had had no recent contact with her. By November 17th, 3 days into the search for Wilma, there were still no leads. Wilma was normally active on social media, but she had been strangely quiet during the time she was missing. As a result, some 5,000 people joined the search effort, and police returned to Tishko to gather more information. However, Tishko insisted that he knew nothing about Wilma's disappearance. Tishko claimed that Wilma had moved on to another man after they broke up, but there was no evidence to support this claim. Wilma's friends and family were left deeply concerned about her disappearance. Meanwhile, Wilma's family shared disturbing details with police about how Wilma's life had changed for the worse since living with Tishko. According to Wilma's family, Tishko controlled Wilma's life. Her sister, Emily, revealed that Wilma confessed that she was abused while living with Tishko. But despite this abuse, Wilma still had strong feelings for Tishko. Tishko took extreme measures to monitor Wilma's activities, including installing a GPS device on her phone. This allowed him to constantly track her location. A series of text messages between the two revealed Tishko's controlling behavior. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's alibi. He claimed that after arriving home from work at 5 p.m., he did not leave his apartment. To verify Tishko's story, police tracked the GPS on Tishko's phone. Police found CCTV footage showing Tishko at a supermarket around 2:30 p.m. on the day Wilma went missing. He then returned home from work at 5 p.m. Neighbors reported a loud argument between Tishko and Wilma, and arguments were common between them. A loud argument between the Wilma and Tishko occurred around 6 p.m. This prompted a concerned neighbor to check on them. As the neighbor approached the apartment door, they noticed an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was unsettling, but the neighbor, unsure of what to do next, returned to their own apartment. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's activities, including his workplace and company vehicle. They requested forensic testing on the vehicle and reviewed the GPS data, which revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th. According to the GPS log, Tishko had visited clients and returned to his residence during his regular work hours on those days. On the evening of the argument, around 6:30 p.m., Tishko left his apartment. Witnesses saw him walking alone along the freeway, wearing all black clothing. A motorcyclist described Tishko as appearing lost in thought. Police stopped Tishko and escorted him home. When questioned, Tishko said he initially intended to catch a train but decided to walk home instead. However, the police did not file an official report on the incident. Later, on November 19, 2019, Tishko was arrested. He had obvious scratches on his wrists. A search of Tishko's apartment revealed clues such as Wilma's belongings, including a handbag, jacket, shoes, and eyeglasses. Wilma's mother, Linda, insisted that her daughter would always carry her bag, adding to the mystery. Forensic experts tested the scene with Blue Star, a sophisticated version of luminol, and found a trail of blood. Every room had blood on the walls and floors, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place throughout the apartment. The bed had a gruesome stain, a torso-shaped mark that was visible under the glow of Blue Star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and on the living room wall added to the horrific scene. The large amount of blood found made it seem unlikely that anyone could have survived. The search continued outside the apartment, where trash bags were found containing Tishko's bedding with incriminating blood stains. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was shown the evidence against him. However, he strongly denied any involvement, claiming he would have known if someone had been seriously hurt in his home. At the same time, more and more people were joining the search for Wilma every day. The apartment where Wilma was last seen has now been turned into a crime scene, but all attempts to contact Wilma have been unsuccessful. 2 weeks after Wilma went missing, on November 28, police brought in sniffer dogs to assist in the search. These trained dogs are experts at detecting the scent of dead bodies. When they entered the bedroom, one of the dogs quickly indicated that it had found something, a sign that there was likely a dead person or human remains in the area. A strong, unpleasant stench filled the apartment, making the already gloomy atmosphere even more oppressive. The police had searched the place before, but this time they carefully searched the bedroom, paying special attention to the area the dogs had marked. They focused on a wardrobe, which at first glance looked like another piece of furniture. However, inside this ordinary-looking wardrobe was a small travel suitcase. When they opened the suitcase, the police found a large object wrapped in aluminum kitchen foil. When they carefully removed the foil, they witnessed a horrifying sight with blood stains on the foil. Wilma's head had been severed, wrapped, and secured with tape. The travel case, which held the gruesome evidence of Wilma's fate, was sent to the forensic labs in Gothenburg for further analysis. A detailed examination uncovered Tishko's fingerprints. The investigation revealed the shocking conclusion of the case. Although the exact cause of Wilma's death could not be confirmed, investigators found severe injuries to her head and eyes consistent with blunt force trauma. The violent nature of the decapitation made it difficult to assess the full extent of Wilma's head injuries. Wilma's family was devastated by the news of Wilma's tragic fate. Wilma's mother Linda joined the efforts to find the rest of Wilma's body. The family was forced to confront the horrific details of the crime, which were slowly emerging from the evidence found in Tishko's apartment. A harrowing picture began to emerge. Wilma's final moments may have taken place in the living room, where she was brutally attacked, suffering a fatal blow to the head. Swedish police recorded Tishko's denial of involvement in Wilma's murder, in which he maintained his innocence. His statement revealed a distorted perception of love, as he said, "You forget that this is a girl he loved and that he lived his whole life for. If he killed her, he wouldn't be able to keep her head." Despite this, law enforcement gathered enough evidence to charge Tishko, and his trial was scheduled for May 2020. Throughout the trial, Wilma's body remained missing. Tishko showed no signs of remorse or emotion. In court, his defense team tried to argue that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his irrational beliefs and claims about Wilma as evidence. However, this defense was unsuccessful. On July 27, 2020, the court delivered its verdict. Tishko, 23, was found guilty of murdering 17-year-old Wilma Anderson and was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, the appeals court later reduced his sentence to 18 years. The sentence was reduced in part due to a lack of concrete evidence surrounding the circumstances of Wilma's death, including the fact that her body was never found. Wilma's funeral was finally held in late 2020, bringing closure to the tragic events, but undoubtedly causing immense grief for her family. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Swartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club. As Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a 4-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els Van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els Van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els Van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els Van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els Van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els Van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els Van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els Van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els Van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els Van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els Van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els Van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els Van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els Van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els Van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els Van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els Van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els Van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els Van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els Van Doren had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els Van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked OPLAB residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between OPLAB and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els van Doren. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els van Doren's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els van Doren. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els van Doren's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els van Doren's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els van Doren had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els van Doren. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els van Doren. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els Van Doren's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els Van Doren. The letter affirmed that Els Van Doren's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els Van Doren's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els Van Doren to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els Van Doren. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els Van Doren's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els Van Doren began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els Van Doren. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els Van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els Van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els Van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els Van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els Van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els Van Doren, who will be deeply missed. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home, and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Otavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Otavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Otavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Otavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Otavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Otavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, the friend had explained that Otavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Otavio to get his side of the story. Otavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Otavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Otavio and Heather, Otavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Otavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Otavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Otavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Otavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Otavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Otavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Otavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but it still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a light-hearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, he admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ardith Wood. Ardith Wood, a 27-year-old woman, is a beautiful and extremely intelligent girl. She was a PhD candidate in philosophy at Waterloo University and worked as an editor for a philosophy journal. Ardith is about to achieve his long-held dream of becoming a professor. In the summer of 2003, Ardith visited her family in Ottawa, Canada. She spends time happily with her loved ones, going for walks and cooking together. On August 6th, Ardith went for a morning jog. When she returned home, she found her parents had thoughtfully prepared a delicious breakfast for her. With the warm weather, Ardith decided to borrow her brother's bike and go for a ride. She promised to return in a couple of hours. Her mother planned to go shopping before lunch, expecting Ardith to be back by then. Ardith cycled on a trail that wound through the forest, along the river, and past cliffs. The route was usually peaceful and safe, but on this day, something very bad happened. Ardith failed to return home, leaving her mother worried. A heavy downpour began, adding to the concern. The woman realized her daughter wouldn't be riding her bike in the bad weather, but as time passed and Ardith didn't return, the family began to search for her. They thought she might have fallen off her bike and needed help. Since the city has many bike paths, they weren't sure which one she chose. They had to search the entire town. Despite their efforts, they found nothing, and when night fell, they went to the police station. The bad weather forced them to postpone the search until the next morning. The next day there was still no news of Ardith, prompting police to launch the largest search operation in Ottawa history. The massive search operation involved around 1,000 people, including rescue teams, police officers, dog handlers and trained dogs, helicopters, and a large number of volunteers. Ardith's family joined the search, putting up posters with her photo all over the city. However, the first few days showed no progress. The police then asked the public for help. Before long, a local resident called in, saying that on the day Ardith disappeared, she was on the bike path in the forest and saw a suspicious man with a bicycle. A young man with a pleasant appearance, well-dressed but acting suspiciously, was described by the witness. His behavior was frightening, as he had attempted to push a girl off her bike and drag her into the bushes. Fortunately, others arrived on the scene, and the perpetrator fell behind, allowing the girl to escape quickly. Following this incident, the girl no longer felt safe walking or cycling alone. The incident occurred in a Green Creek area, and she suspected the stranger may have also attacked Ardith. The witness was asked to create a composite sketch at the police station. The suspect was described as a light-skinned, dark-haired young man with a beard and glasses, aged 20 to 30 years old. He was athletically built. However, when the sketch was shown to Ardith's family, they did not recognize anyone familiar to Ardith. The sketch's features, such as glasses and a beard, were common at the time, making it difficult to pinpoint a specific individual. The investigators decided not to share Ardith's picture with the media, as they were concerned it would trigger a flood of misleading tips. Instead, police showed her photo to local residents. Believing someone must have seen her due to her striking appearance, they believed it was likely that a witness had seen her and could offer a valuable clue. Their assumption proved correct when 16-year-old Laura called the police. Laura said she saw Ardith on the bike trail on the same day that Ardith went missing. Laura was riding her bicycle and noticed Ardith sitting on a rock, appearing to rest. As Laura continued on, she heard a scream and turned to see Ardith arguing with a man. Laura was unsure what to make of the situation, thinking it might be a lover's quarrel. Ardith didn't seem to be calling for help, and Ardith eventually followed the man into the woods. Laura wanted to know what was happening but was scared by an approaching storm, and she quickly rode home. As Laura was leaving, she thought she heard a scream. The police asked her to come to the station to look at a composite sketch of a suspect. She recognized the person in the sketch. According to Laura, the incident occurred around 10 p.m. at Green Creek. After that, the police received several more calls from girls who had encountered the same creepy guy on the trail. He had attacked them, but they were lucky enough to escape. There was one particular call from one woman that was especially noteworthy. She described how an attractive stranger approached her while she was walking. They had a pleasant conversation at first, but then his behavior changed drastically. The man started grabbing her, but the woman was able to push him away with her bicycle and quickly flee. She didn't look back, fearing he would catch up to her. When she got home, she told her family about the incident and warned them to stay away from that area. Strangely, none of the girls who were attacked had reported the incidents to the police. The search for the suspect focused on the creek area. Soon, the police found Ardith's bicycle, which suggested they were on the right track. Meanwhile, investigators received an anonymous call that would prove to be a crucial breakthrough in the case. He reveals that a terrible incident happened in the forest, and alarmingly, he was involved in it. He said he didn't mean to hurt or kill anyone, but when he panicked, he hid the body. The man explained that he moved Ardith over a creek, made a shallow hole, and put her in it, hiding the spot with branches. Then, he quickly hung up the phone. The police were able to locate the source of the call, which was a phone booth situated 20 minutes away from Ottawa. The police quickly arrived, looking for witnesses or collecting evidence such as fingerprints or DNA from the anonymous caller. However, upon arrival, they were met with disappointment. The handset had been thoroughly wiped clean, and no eyewitnesses or surveillance cameras were found. The search for Ardith continued in Green Creek with the aid of specially trained dogs that could detect the scent of human remains. With the assistance of the dogs, the investigators located Ardith's grave, situated between two trees in a secluded, picturesque area. As the detective approached, they saw the partially buried, naked body of Ardith. Perhaps the criminal panicked after being seen by someone, leading to a hasty burial of Ardith. Upon examining the crime scene, criminologists found no fingerprints or DNA evidence. Medical examiners confirmed the cause of death as drowning, with algae present in Ardith's lungs, indicating she was alive when submerged in water. Despite the body being discovered naked, there were no definitive signs of rape, although the possibility was not ruled out. The police suspected the crime was sexually motivated, as the perpetrator targeted girls in secluded areas. Detectives were concerned that the suspect might commit again crime, so they had to quickly find and arrest him. The police thought the perpetrator had already assaulted several girls and killed Ardith, so they were determined to stop them from hurting anyone else. To expedite the investigation, authorities released a composite sketch of the suspect to the media, soliciting public assistance in identifying the individual. The response yielded approximately 4,000 leads, which investigators meticulously processed, a time-consuming task. A pivotal development emerged on September 10th, when police disclosed that the suspect had a distinctive eagle tattoo on his left shoulder, as reported by the girls who encountered him in the forest. A crucial lead emerged that could potentially track down the perpetrator. The media released a sketch of the tattoo, leading to several calls to the police from individuals reporting acquaintances with bird tattoos on various body parts. Unfortunately, these tips didn't yield any concrete results. However, in April 2004, investigators stumbled upon a significant clue while processing another batch of calls. A man claimed to know the killer, stating that the individual lived in the area and was seen riding a bicycle in the Green Creek vicinity around the time of the crime. Intrigued, detectives invited he for questioning. Upon arriving at the police station, investigators were astonished to find that the individual matched the perpetrator's description in both appearance and age. During the conversation, the young man displayed visible nervousness, stating that he frequently rode his bike along the trail without understanding the issue at hand. When asked to reveal his shoulder, an eagle tattoo was discovered, sparking further interest from the authorities. The investigation revealed that the man had a prior history of run-ins with the law, making him the prime suspect. During the 3-hour interrogation, he responded to questions with hostility and aggression. At one point, he described himself as unpredictable, like a scorpion under a rock. Despite lacking an alibi for the day of Ardith's disappearance, he denied any involvement in her murder. However, due to insufficient evidence, the suspect was released, but the police kept him under surveillance. Weeks later, he was brought in for questioning again. This time, the detectives were better prepared, having gathered more information about him. They also suggested he take a polygraph test, which he agreed to and surprisingly passed. Consequently, the police were left with no alternative but to dismiss the suspicions against him. With the investigation stalled, the Ottawa police offered a $50,000 reward for any information that would help solve the case, the largest reward ever offered in similar circumstances. The response was extremely strong, with approximately 5,000 calls received, each providing a potential lead for the police to investigate. The investigator became interested in a tip about Christopher Myers, a 25-year-old janitor who had previously been convicted of selling illegal substances. Colleagues described Christopher as quiet and non-confrontational, with a face that closely resembled the composite sketch of the suspect, including a similar beard. Initially, the police were thrilled, thinking they had found the right man. However, they were wrong. Christopher had an alibi for the day of Ardith's disappearance. His landlord stated that on August 6, 2003, Christopher was at home in the morning, then he heading to his job at a restaurant. This revelation puzzled the police, as they wondered how the landlord could recall the details of that day so clearly a year later. Another discrepancy emerged. Christopher did not have an eagle tattoo on his shoulder, despite witnesses claiming to have seen one. The detectives considered the possibility that he had removed the tattoo and remained convinced that Christopher was the suspect they were looking for. They were determined to prove it. A few weeks after Ardith's incident, a similar attack took place in the evening. A girl who bore a striking resemblance to Ardith was walking alone across a bridge when she noticed someone following her. Upon turning around, she saw an attractive man approaching on a bicycle. The girl made it clear she wasn't interested in talking and asked to be left alone. The man initially rode past her, but then turned his bicycle around and charged at her. With no one nearby to assist, the attacker jumped off his bike and forcibly dragged the girl into the bushes. Her loud screams seemed to frighten the assailant, causing him to flee. The victim reported the incident to the police, but it was handled by different investigators who treated it as an attempted robbery. The detectives working on Ardith's case didn't learn about this incident until much later. In May, another similar attack occurred, targeting a blonde woman. The woman was walking home late one evening after attending a party when a stranger approached her, trying to initiate a conversation. After she asked to be left alone, the stranger claimed to be lost and asked for directions. The woman provided him with the necessary information, and he seemingly left. However, just 10 minutes later, he launched a surprise attack on her from the bushes. The assailant violently attacked the girl, strangling her and twisting her neck. Believing her life was in danger, she fiercely resisted by screaming, hitting, and biting him. Her cries for help caught the attention of nearby residents, who rushed out to investigate. The commotion frightened the attacker, causing him to flee in haste, but he not before making a critical mistake, dropping his phone. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the phone belonged to Christopher Myers. This discovery confirmed the connection between Christopher Myers and a number of cases that shared a similar motif, all targeted blonde girls of similar appearance. When brought in for questioning, Christopher denied any involvement in the murder or other attacks, claiming he had never been to Green Creek or met Ardith. He attributed his behavior to mental health issues and uncontrollable aggression, but insisted he had never physically harmed anyone. Detectives observed that Christopher had crooked teeth and asked him to undergo a polygraph test. The 5-hour test revealed that Christopher was not telling the truth, but he insisted he was innocent, claiming the polygraph results were incorrect. As polygraph results are not admissible as evidence, Christopher to be released. Over the next 5 months, detectives gathered more evidence by interviewing Christopher's acquaintances, including family members, friends, co-workers, and his ex-girlfriend. The investigation found that Christopher had a tough childhood due to growing up in a home plagued by alcoholism. As a result, he developed attention deficit disorder and schizophrenia. Christopher was removed from his biological family and adopted by another couple who showed him love and care. However, his behavioral problems were too difficult to control, and when he was 12 years old, his adoptive parents took him back to the orphanage. As he aged, Christopher appeared to lead a typical life. He graduated from school, attended university, made friends, and lived in a dorm. However, Christopher's roommate thought him strange due to the disturbing stories he shared, which eventually led to him dorm kicked out. An ex-girlfriend revealed that Christopher enjoyed cycling in Ottawa's scenic trails and had a fascination with tattoos, notably one of an eagle on his left shoulder. A sketch of the tattoo was shown to the ex-girlfriend. She confirmed its resemblance to the one Christopher had. On October 13, 2005, Christopher was called in for questioning. The interrogation took place in a small room, with burly men who positioned their chairs close to Christopher, exerting significant psychological pressure. The investigators began with a straightforward assertion: "We know you are responsible for Ardith's death." Christopher gave a vague response initially. 3 hours later, he began testifying, but his account was confusing and inconsistent. He admitted to being in Green Creek on the day of the incident, where he met Ardith. He was drawn to her beauty and tried to get to know her. He started by complimenting her and chatting, then invited her into the woods, and she agreed. In the woods, Christopher claimed he hugged and kissed her, but she pulled away, Ardith apparently not enjoying his advances. Ardith tried to run but fell into the creek. Christopher claimed he tried to save her but was unsuccessful. His actions after the incident, however, raised suspicions. He pulled her body from the water, undressed her, and buried her. When faced with a murder charge, Christopher immediately retracted his statement, claiming he had never met Ardith and his testimony was based on information gathered from the press. Christopher eventually confessed to the murder, providing a map of the trails in Green Creek where he encountered Ardith. He also identified another individual, likely 16 years old Laura, who witnessed him with Ardith in the forest. Laura confirmed that Christopher was the man she saw at the time. On October 20, 2005, Christopher was arrested. Initially, he agreed to recreate the incidents at the crime scene but later claimed it was not the correct location. Despite the evidence matching, Christopher's unstable mental state led to inconsistent testimony, and he confessed to additional attacks on girls, resulting in further charges. During the trial, Christopher's lawyer portrayed him as a troubled young man. Initially, Christopher denied his previous confessions but later decided to plead guilty on January 8, 2008, following his defense attorney's advice. 5 years after the murder, Christopher admitted to the crime but refused to provide motives or details. He also confessed to the other attacks. The prosecution argued that Christopher's presence on the forest trail that day was not coincidental. Instead, he was deliberately stalking potential victims, much like a hunter. He had already assaulted several girls who managed to escape. It is thought that Christopher's intention was to sexually assault someone. Ardith happened to match his desired victim type, being a blonde woman he found attractive. Christopher tried to start a conversation with Ardith, but things got worse, and an argument broke out between them. Laura happened to be riding by, overheard their altercation. The killer tricked Ardith into going into the woods, where he attacked and tried to rape her. To escape, Ardith ran and jumped into the creek. However, Christopher caught up to her and drowned her, then buried her body. Ardith's parents supported the prosecution's account, stating that their daughter was a strong swimmer and couldn't have accidentally drowned in the creek. They believed Christopher had intentionally killed Ardith, but they couldn't understand why Ardith had followed him into the wood. As part of a plea deal, Christopher admitted to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. In 2020, his parole application was rejected because authorities believed there was a significant likelihood he would reoffend against women. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ariel Castro. Ariel Castro was born in 1960 on July 10 in the city of Yauco in Puerto Rico. Ariel was the third child in a poor family of 4 children, including parents Liliana Rodriguez and Pedro Castro, and sisters O'Neill, Pedro, and older sister Bonita. Ariel's family barely made ends meet and his parents were constantly arguing. Before Ariel went to school, his parents divorced. His mother Liliana took care of all the children. Now Liliana had almost nothing left to feed her children. In desperation, Liliana and her children decided to move to the United States and settled for a while in southeastern Pennsylvania. In the city of Reading, however, they soon moved to the neighboring state of Ohio and eventually settled in the city of Cleveland. Soon after, Ariel's father Pedro Castro also moved to Cleveland with his new wife and their children. Pedro Castro lived near Liliana and her children. Liliana later married, and Ariel soon had 4 more siblings. Ariel attended Lincoln West High School in Cleveland, graduating in 1978. In addition, Ariel also studied music and attended church regularly with her mother and siblings in a traditional Catholic family. As a teenager, Ariel met a young girl named Grimilda Figueroa, who lived next door to Castro. The two became friends while attending school, and Ariel and Grimilda later began dating. After saving money, Ariel and Grimilda decided to move to a house on Seymour Avenue in southwest Cleveland. The 2-story, 1,300 square foot house was built in 1890 and has been remodeled several times. Inside, there are 4 bedrooms, a dining room, a bathroom, and a spacious basement. However, since moving into the new house, Ariel regularly beats Grimilda and humiliates her morally and physically. Grimilda is still naive at this time and thinks that the situation will improve after the wedding and the birth of the child. However, as time goes by, the situation only gets worse. Grimilda tries not to let anyone know about the terrible things that are happening in her life. Grimilda hides her injuries under her clothes and makes up excuses for the injuries that cannot be hidden. In 1993, Ariel beat his wife so brutally that Grimilda suffered broken ribs, nose, and both arms from falling down the stairs after being pushed by Ariel. However, Grimilda steadfastly refused to report the incident to the police. The incident was covered up. Ariel repeatedly beat Grimilda in the mid-1990s. On one occasion, Ariel caused Grimilda a serious head injury that resulted in a blood clot and a tumor that could not be surgically removed. Ariel was arrested but released just a day later. By the late 90s, Grimilda was tired of the constant beatings and living in fear. Grimilda finally decided to file for divorce, took away the appliances, and moved out of the house. Grimilda won custody of all 4 of their children, Arlene, Antonio, Angie, and Amelia. However, Grimilda's nightmare did not end there. Ariel began to pursue Grimilda for money and threatened her to return to him. Realizing that Grimilda could not handle it on her own, Grimilda finally decided to report to the police to get a restraining order against Ariel. In late April 2012, Grimilda suffered complications related to an inoperable tumor caused by a head injury. Grimilda's children were old enough to care for themselves and live their own lives, so they did not need a guardian. However, the children still maintained contact with their father Ariel. Back in the early 2000s, Ariel lived alone in a 2-story house on Seymour Avenue. Ariel worked as a school bus driver and had a passion for playing the guitar. Ariel often performed at city festivals in Latin bands. His neighbors often spoke highly of him, praising his hospitality and kind personality. However, there were many strange things in Ariel's actions that went unnoticed. That he was prosecuted several times for traffic violations while driving a school bus. He had speeding and dangerously making U-turns, for which he was fined and even suspended for a while until he was fired in early 2013 for an act that threatened the lives and health of his young passengers. Additionally, Ariel frequently changed bands because Ariel was kicked out for being late, disrupting rehearsals and concerts. Another strange thing is that after his divorce from Grimilda, he never invited anyone to his house, although Ariel often invited neighbors to barbecues in his backyard. It's hard to say how dangerous this smiling, kindly-faced Ariel was. Michelle Knight was Ariel Castro's first victim. In 2002, on August 23, Ariel decided to kidnap Michelle Knight, then 21 years old. Michelle Knight was born in 1981 and came to Cleveland. Michelle was a frequent runaway and had a history with the police. After becoming a single mother, Michelle faced the risk of losing custody of her 2-year-old child. On the day of the incident, Michelle visited a relative's house and then had to go to court, where the issue of regaining custody of her 2-year-old child had just been decided. While walking down the street, Michelle saw Ariel Castro driving up and offering her a ride. Since Michelle knew the nearby school bus driver, she didn't suspect Ariel and decided to get in his car. On the way, Ariel tells Michelle that he is taking care of puppies at home and invites Michelle to visit them and help Ariel find homes for the puppies. Michelle agrees, but as soon as she enters Ariel's house, he changes completely. Ariel becomes violent and begins hitting Michelle repeatedly. Ariel then chains her up and takes her to the basement. Over the next few days, Ariel starved Michelle and denied her water. Michelle endured constant beatings and abuse. She could not even get up and had to beg Ariel to let her go, promising not to tell anyone about it. When Michelle's mother reported her daughter missing to the police, for years the police did not prioritize the case and allocated limited resources to the investigation. Michelle's family searched for the girl themselves by contacting neighbors, friends, and concerned people. They also asked for help from Ariel, who helped post flyers around the city with Michelle's picture. However, no one knew that Michelle was being held in Ariel's basement. Ariel's second character was Amanda Berry. This girl was kidnapped in the spring of 2003. Amanda was a young girl who lived near Ariel and worked at a local restaurant. She was born on April 22, 1986, and was about to celebrate her 17th birthday. However, on April 21, 2003, Amanda mysteriously disappeared. After her shift, Amanda called home and told her sister that she would be home soon. As Amanda left the restaurant and headed to the bus stop, Ariel drove up to her and offered to give Amanda a ride home. Amanda accepted. Amanda knew Ariel's son because they had been in the same class for many years. So Amanda trusted Ariel and agreed to go with him. However, Ariel lied to her along the way, saying that Ariel needed help. When Amanda entered Ariel's house, Amanda was trapped. Ariel raped her in public, then took Amanda to the basement. There, she met Michelle, who had been kidnapped and held captive for months. Amanda was also attacked, abused, and starved for days until Amanda's body was too weak to resist. A massive search was launched after Amanda went missing. Her disappearance was widely reported in the media, and Amanda's parents appeared on popular television shows such as Oprah Winfrey and Montel Williams. They shared their story and urged anyone with information about Amanda's whereabouts to contact them immediately. On one show, famous psychic Sylvia Browne was invited on. After viewing a photo of Amanda, she said that the girl had died and her body was in the water. The words troubled Amanda's parents, but the mother, Louise Miller, continued to search for her daughter until she died in March 2006 of a heart attack. In 2012, a criminal named Robert Wolford suddenly confessed to Amanda's murder and offered to show them where her body was buried. Robert led police to a vacant lot in West Cleveland, claiming that he had buried Amanda there. However, a lengthy search failed to uncover any trace. Robert was later found to have lied for fame and television, leading to his being sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison for perjury and obstructing justice. In April 2004. This time, Ariel chose Gina De Jesus, a 14-year-old girl in his daughter's class. Ariel met Gina and another girlfriend after school. After chatting for a while, the two girls decided to go home separately. When they reached the corner of West 105th Street, Ariel met Gina and offered to take Gina home. Since Gina had known Ariel since childhood, having long been the father of her best friend, Gina got into Ariel's car without suspecting anything. Although it was daytime, there were no witnesses to the kidnapping because the streets were deserted at that time. In addition, Gina took the initiative to get into Ariel's car, so there was no easily detectable conflict. The story of Gina's disappearance was aired on Fox TV's America's Most Wanted and was re-aired twice in 2005 and 2006. Ariel also posed as a volunteer looking for missing girls. When she brought Gina home, Ariel treated Gina similarly to Michelle and Amanda. Abused, sexually assaulted, and locked in the basement. It is believed that the kidnapping was carried out by a middle-aged Hispanic man. Was seen by a passerby. There was even a sketch that looked very similar to Ariel. During the 10 years of their captivity, Ariel constantly abused her victims. They were often starved, attempting to break their spirits and destroy their self-esteem. Severe punishments were also carried out if the three girls did not comply. Michelle, the oldest captive, suffered the most. Ariel would not spare her and would often beat Michelle to intimidate the other girls, forcing them to obey without asking any questions. After years of captivity in the dark and damp basement, Ariel moved them to a room on the second floor, which overlooked the courtyard. During her captivity, Michelle became pregnant at least 5 times. However, each time she showed signs of pregnancy, Ariel brutally attempted to terminate the pregnancy, starving Michelle and kicking her in the stomach until Michelle miscarried. After one brutal torture, Michelle almost died from severe blood loss. Despite this, Ariel remained completely indifferent and refused to let her call a rescue vehicle. The girls were not allowed to bathe more than once a week. To use the toilet, they had only a bucket of water, which Ariel rarely emptied. Ariel only fed the girls once a day but constantly beat and abused them. One day, Ariel gives the girls a puppy, but a week later, Ariel brutally kills the dog in front of them as punishment for Michelle's disobedience. Gina, in 2006, Amanda realizes she is pregnant and is horrified by the image of Ariel beating her to induce a miscarriage. Ariel this time let Amanda get pregnant and give birth. In preparation for the birth, he bought a special inflatable float. In December 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter named Jocelyn. Although the baby was born weak, she was lucky to survive. As Jocelyn grew older, the girls began to care for her and create a close environment for her. This helped them temporarily forget the difficult situation they were in. Ariel also changed significantly after having his daughters. Ariel began giving the 3 girls he kidnapped small gifts and sometimes letting them out into the yard with Jocelyn, but always under close supervision. Jocelyn was developing well, speaking clearly, and being taught to read, write, and count by her mother. Outwardly, she appeared healthy, well cared for and well fed. Despite being imprisoned for years under Ariel's relentless control, the victims attempted to escape many times, but each time they were brutally punished, but the girls never gave up hope. However, on May 6, 2013, Ariel left the house and forgot to lock one of the interior doors. This gave Amanda an opportunity. She left the room and went to the window that looked out onto the street. When Amanda saw a neighbor walking past the house, Amanda began banging and screaming at the window. A man heard a strange noise and stopped, thinking someone needed help. Another neighbor also heard the screams and decided to call emergency services. While waiting for the police to arrive, the men broke the lock on the front door and helped Amanda and her young daughter escape. When the police arrived, Amanda told them that her name was Amanda Berry and that she had been kidnapped 10 years ago. Amanda also said that 2 other kidnapped girls were being held in a house, in other apartments. All 3 were rescued and taken to hospital the same day. Amanda, her younger daughter Jocelyn, and Gina were not in critical condition, but Michelle had suffered severe physical and mental damage from the constant abuse. Michelle lost hearing in one ear and almost lost sight in her left eye. Many of Michelle's bones were bent and would not heal, requiring plastic surgery to restore the shape of her disfigured face. After the trauma and forced abortion, Michelle was unable to have children. When police received a report of 3 missing girls and a baby found in Ariel's home, Ariel Castro was arrested in a McDonald's parking lot just an hour later. Ariel's brothers, O'Neill and Pedro, were also arrested on suspicion of involvement, as they had been frequent visitors to Ariel's home. However, they were quickly released due to lack of evidence linking them to the case, as the victims had confirmed. Ariel was charged with forcible kidnapping, assault, battery, forcible confinement, cruelty, and taking the life of an unborn child. Ariel could have received a common law conviction. However, the prosecution required a death sentence. Ariel agreed to cooperate with the investigation and pleaded guilty. Ariel would recount all the events that took place in his home. In return, he would not be sentenced to death, but instead to life in prison. Surprisingly, Ariel recalls in great detail the days of kidnapping the girls and bringing them into his home. Ariel recounted all the torture and abuse he had inflicted on his victims, but blamed the girls for unwittingly agreeing to get into Ariel's car and condemned himself to such a fate. On August 1, 2013, Ariel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On July 9, 2013, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus began a new life after being released from the Insanity's custody. After his conviction, Ariel was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Orient, Ohio, where he was closely monitored. However, on September 3, 2013, Ariel was found dead in his cell. At the time, Ariel was 53 years old. Ariel Castro's family members have apologized to the victims and their families. Michelle Knight wrote a book titled Life After Darkness: Finding Healing and Happiness After the Cleveland Kidnapping in 2018. Gina De Jesus also published a memoir titled Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. There are also multiple documentary projects and 2 feature films about the terrifying kidnapping mission. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristen Smart. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. She was raised by her parents, Stan and Denise Smart. When she was young, the family moved to Stockton, California. She is the oldest of 3 children. Kristen's mother, Denise, often called her a dreamer. Kristen loved the ocean and had an adventurous spirit. She was truly passionate about experiencing life. Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before college, she worked as a lifeguard and a summer camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She was ambitious but indecisive. Kristen initially enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture because she loved to draw, but later changed her major to communication studies. Denise said that Kristen wanted to travel the world as a reporter. On Memorial Day weekend in 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail, "Good news, good news. I'll call home Sunday." Kristen was in regular contact with her family every Sunday. That day, Kristen had attended an off-campus birthday party that Friday night. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled taking her there. Margarita said Kristen seemed a little upset that Margarita couldn't join her that night. Margarita's last words to Kristen were to be careful. Kristen was wearing a gray cropped t-shirt, black shorts, and red Puma sneakers. As the party was winding down, at 2 a.m., classmate Tim Davis found Kristen unconscious on the grass nearby. He and another classmate and acquaintance of Kristen's, Cheryl Anderson, helped her walk back to the school dormitory. Paul Florist then approached Kristen and offered to help her get back to her dorm, saying he was leaving the party. Paul, Kristen, and Cheryl returned to campus, and since Davis lived off campus, he could not accompany them. Once the 3 of them were alone, Cheryl began to notice Paul's strange behavior. She noticed the many unexpected stops along the way and the way he interacted with Kristen. While walking, Paul would frequently hold Kristen around the waist, and Kristen would also wrap her arms around his neck. This made Cheryl even more curious, especially when Paul suggested that Cheryl walk ahead while he and Kristen tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before reminding Paul to make sure Kristen returned safely. Paul claimed that he had dropped Kristen off at the intersection of the hallways leading to both of their dorms. It was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart was never seen again. When Sunday passed without a call from Kristen, Kristen's roommates and neighbors thought something was wrong. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing, but no report was filed. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. 5 days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by UPD investigators. Paul said that the 2 had gone their separate ways at the intersection. However, investigators quickly noticed Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul explained that he had injured it during a basketball game. But a friend later disputed this story, stating that Paul's black eye had appeared before the basketball game. Paul told the friend that he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later, Paul was interviewed again and confessed that he had lied about the black eye incident. This time, Paul said that he had hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. However, when questioned further, Paul admitted that this story didn't make sense either. He said he was in the truck at about 2 a.m. on May 27, 1996, and was installing a car radio because he was selling the truck. A search for Kristen began. Search dogs were used on June 29, 1996. For dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search for clues at the dormitory. Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog was sent to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest in the room, except for the corner of a mattress. Dog handler Carta Adela Morris said the dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. During the search, their reactions suggested a high probability that there was a body in room 128. Another handler also recalled her dog's behavior while searching room 128. The dog searched the left side of the room several times, and Tori's behavior and strong reactions suggested that she had picked up the scent of something, but was still searching for its source. Although Paul Flores remained the prime suspect, no formal charges were ever filed. During that time, Paul Flores continued to live his life freely, although he was suspected by the police. From 1996 to 2007, the investigation continued, and searches were conducted at every possible location, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. However, none of these searches yielded positive results. On the advice of his attorney, Paul Flores decided not to answer any questions by exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A person who invokes this provision has the right to remain silent and is not required to provide information that could incriminate them. During his 1997 deposition, Paul exercised this right and remained silent. This made it difficult for investigators, especially attorney James R. Murphy, as they were unable to find any new leads. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking Paul to the case, former Sheriff Ed Williams also admitted that he did not see a way to close the case. Paul's silence frustrated the authorities. The Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit for Kristen. However, the court decided not to proceed with charges. Kristen's case remains under criminal investigation. Paul and his family have refused to publicly address Kristen's case or the allegations against them. A roommate of Paul's, Derek C., said Paul joked about Kristen's disappearance. However, these allegations remain speculative as Paul has hired a lawyer to defend himself from further questioning. 6 years after her disappearance, Denise Smart said it was a difficult time. A longtime case follower, Chris Lambert, who was 8 at the time, was haunted by Kristen's disappearance. As he grew older, he wondered why the case of Kristen were still no answers. In 2018, Chris quit his job to create a podcast about the case full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by his passion for finding answers. In 2019, Chris visited Kristen's memorial on her birthday and decided to wait to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. Chris met Kristen's mother and began talking to her about her daughter. From there, Chris and the Smart family built a strong relationship and worked to bring Kristen's story to the public through the podcast, In Your Own Backyard. The podcast began as a local series but quickly went national and garnered over 11 million downloads. The core of the podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from campus. Chris has a unique ability to get people to feel comfortable sharing information with him. He has interviewed many people who have been involved in the case to varying degrees. Chris is especially interested in witnesses who are reluctant to speak or have been ignored by investigators. He has uncovered many allegations that have been speculation for years. An interview with an Australian exchange student brought to light a possible fight between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student allegedly saw Kristen fighting with Paul on the night of her disappearance. During the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance, several theories emerged. The first theory was that Paul Flores was injured in a fight with Kristen. The second theory was that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. The third theory was that Kristen's body was buried in the Flores backyard. The investigation also revealed allegations of serious misconduct by Paul toward multiple women. Women who had attended school or worked with Paul reported his excessive flirting and excessive drinking. Several women accused Paul of sexual or physical assault, including harassment and controlling behavior. Chris attempted to contact Paul for an interview, but was unsuccessful. An interview could have cleared up some of the loose ends and given Paul a chance to address the allegations against him. However, Chris has not contacted Kristen's family. San Luis Obispo Police Chief Ann Parkinson praised Chris for his work in helping to advance the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance. Chris created a compelling, well-done podcast that drew people to the case. Parkinson noted that going public with the story convinced several people involved to come forward, which had a significant impact on the investigation. Denise Smart also thanked Chris for his hard work, saying that the podcast had created an opportunity for people to come together to seek the truth. She also thanked Sheriff Parkinson for helping to keep the case fresh since he took office in 2011. Although the Flores family has remained silent, the investigation and podcast have shaken their confidence. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores were presented as evidence. Then, on February 5 of that year, authorities executed search warrants at 4 different locations, including a home in Los Angeles. During the search, Paul Flores was briefly detained. On April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was executed at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, California. The search resulted in the recovery of several items of evidence, including date rape, drugs, and videos showing Paul Flores sexually assaulting young women. Paul Flores was subsequently arrested on February 11, 2021, in Palos Verdes, Rancho, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of that year, a search warrant was issued at the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, and police used dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search the property, and an older Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after the dogs conducted the search. On April 13, Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in connection with Kristen's case. Paul and Ruben were charged in the case involving Kristen. Paul was charged with murder, and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Due to the statute of limitations, Paul was able to escape the sexual assault charge but still faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly killing during attempted rape. In September 2021, a judge declared the case sufficient to go to trial in April 2022. However, the trial was postponed and moved to Monterey County. On July 18, 2022, Paul and Ruben's trials began simultaneously but with 2 separate jury groups. In his opening statement, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Pavril described Kristen as a young person who had been cruelly treated and taken too soon. He said Kristen's family was suffering from the unknown whereabouts of their daughter and blamed Paul Flores for this. The deputy prosecutor also presented evidence found at Ruben's home that showed both Paul and Ruben were responsible for Kristen's death and the disposal of her body. However, Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, questioned the veracity of this evidence. He said it was a tragic situation that Kristen's body was never found and there was no DNA evidence. He stated that people believed she was dead, but there was no concrete evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at the dorm. Since July, Paul Flores' trial has attracted public attention as multiple allegations of harassment and violence have been made. Several women have come forward to accuse Paul Flores of inappropriate behavior, including 2 women who call themselves Rondado and Saradu. Both women alleged that they met Paul Flores and then felt unusually lethargic, leading to memory loss. When they woke up, they said Paul Flores had abused them. Their detailed and emotional testimony brought jurors to tears, forcing Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call a recess. In addition, testimony regarding the search of Ruben Flores' home also moved another juror to tears. Investigators and experts also attended the trial, providing more details about the case. Judge O'Keefe said the trial would be long and difficult, and jurors would likely be emotional at times. One of the key pieces of evidence presented at the trial was Jennifer Hudson's testimony. She said she met Paul Flores when she was 17 and that he told her that he had buried Kristen Smart under the slope in his backyard in Hawasna. This was one of the most important pieces of evidence presented at the trial. Paul's defense attorney questioned Jennifer's testimony and highlighted her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, calling into question her credibility. The attorney suggested that she was being dishonest in her answers to the question. In fact, Jennifer admitted in a social media post that she did not report the incident to police until after a podcast aired. She also canceled an interview with a detective after meeting with the podcast producer in 2019. The attorney went on to ask Jennifer if she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She suggested that this was the most plausible explanation. When the attorney pursued the subject of Jennifer's association with biker gang members, the prosecutor objected to the question and the judge sided with them. During cross-examination, Perverl asked Jennifer to explain her previous testimony and that Jennifer felt responsible for the Smart family's suffering. She explained that if she had not been afraid, she would have spoken up sooner. Jennifer then broke down in tears. No reason was given, and the trial was adjourned after Jennifer's testimony. The trial of Kristen Smart is scheduled to continue until October 2022. For the Smart family, the emotional, decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end. However, the grief over the loss of their daughter will never end. On October 18, 2022, separate juries hearing the case simultaneously in Monterey County Circuit Court found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder and his father, Ruben Flores, not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ruben Flores faces a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on March 10, 2023. Paul Flores is currently serving his sentence at Pleasant Valley State Prison. On August 23, 2023, Flores was attacked by fellow inmate Jason Boudreau, who was serving a life sentence for killing his girlfriend.